For decades, the waters off the coast of Southern California have been the backdrop for strange sightings. The Santa Catalina Channel, stretching 20 miles from the mainland, has long attracted reports of hazy crafts moving slowly over the water, oscillating spheres, massive cloud-like cigars, and even at least one reported underwater UFO with uniformed occupants. Yet, despite all that activity, few incidents have occurred on land. Until the early 1970s, on a quiet road in Palos Verdes known as Dapple Gray Lane, our story begins with two young men, both intelligent, grounded, and carefully rational, qualities that make their account all the more compelling. For anonymity, we'll call the primary witness John Hodges and his friend Peter Rodriguez. John was not just an ordinary observer of UFO phenomenon, he was himself an investigator, someone familiar with the careful, methodical research of unexplained aerial sightings. It was around 2 a.m. on a clear, cool night when John and Pete returned from visiting a friend in Southern California. The streets of Dapple Gray Lane were dark, lined with trees and isolated homes, and the faint glow of the city below barely illuminated their path. As they approached their car, something on the road caught John's eyes. Directly ahead, illuminated in the glow of the headlights, were two entities unlike anything either man had ever seen. John's description would later stun researchers. One, roughly the size of a human torso, the other smaller, like an oversized softball. Both were bluish, shaped like brains, with the delicate filmy texture of duramatter intact. On the larger one, a bright red spot stood out, a strange pulsation, or perhaps a device of some kind. Pete recalls seeing only the larger figure, though John's memory encompassed both. The shock was immediate. Both men froze for a moment, then scrambled into the car, careful not to come closer. Once inside, John carefully maneuvered the vehicle around the entities, and they sped away, the adrenaline of fear and confusion making time feel distorted. Later, John would notice a gap in memory. 2 hours missing from that night, a feature not uncommon in abduction or close encounter cases. Years later, under the guidance of Dr. William McCall, a physician and expert hypnotist, John's memory began to unfold more fully. Under regression, he described the encounter in extraordinary detail. The larger entity, he said, communicated not with words, but directly into his mind. It conveyed warnings, insights, and cryptic counsel about the human condition. "We must be careful," it said. "There are many things you do not understand. If you do not take the time to understand yourselves, you will be instruments of your own fate." Then John found himself transported, or perhaps projected, into a room unlike anything on Earth. He was surrounded by figures, tall and thin, their gray skin, webbed hands, and yellow eyes immediately marking them as non-human. They worked at illuminated panels, their actions precise, almost robotic. Before him floated the brain-like entity, which guided his attention to a large screen showing points of light across the world. Explosions, atomic tests, the devastating power humans wielded, and chillingly, a dead planet. Its destruction a stark warning of what power misuse can bring. Every detail of the experience pressed on John's mind. The dim gray light of the room, the texture of the panels, the quiet focus of the humanoids, the constant hum of energy in the air. At moments, he felt the room shift, the edges fading into darkness, time stretching and compressing. Yet through it all, there was no fear, only a profound, unsettling awareness of forces far beyond his understanding. Pete Rodriguez's recollections, though initially less detailed, confirmed key elements of the encounter. He remembered the object as wet and strange, almost alive. He recalled the sudden warmth he felt as he ran to the car, despite the cool night air, and the sense that the scene itself was altered, cloaked in mist and fog that seemed to distort reality. In hypnosis, Pete added further detail, noting the reddish-gray surface of the larger entity, the vague crew of the humanoid figures, and the strange interplay of light and shadow around the scene. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case is the apparent time aberration. Pete felt John moving in slow motion as he rushed to the car, while John himself had no memory of this distortion. Could proximity to the entities, or perhaps the mysterious UFO associated with them, have altered their perception of time? This remains a fascinating puzzle, one echoed in many close encounter cases. Even more unusual was the communication itself. The brain-like entity spoke directly into John's mind, clearly understandable as English, yet not originating from a mouth or voice in the room. It was as if the thought itself had been externalized, a telepathic projection designed to impart warnings and knowledge. It instructed John that he would not remember the events in full until a later meeting, a feature consistent with time-lapse or memory-blocking phenomena often reported in abduction cases. John's later reflections suggest he viewed the experience as both a warning and a lesson. The entity emphasized the dangers humans pose to themselves and the planet, specifically pointing out nuclear weapons as a threat to global survival. John began to see connections between disparate UFO cases, viewing them not as isolated events but as part of a larger unfolding pattern. He speculated that these encounters were deliberately confusing humanity, preparing people for a greater awareness or perhaps a future contact. The physical setting of Dapple Gray Lane adds to the story's intrigue. The road ends just beyond the site of the encounter, with a sloping hillside dropping into an isolated wooded park. It would have provided an ideal area for a UFO to land or remain hidden. The objects themselves, according to both men, appeared in localized mist, reinforcing the sense of altered reality and making the experience all the more surreal. Years later, Pete would undergo his own hypnotic regression, confirming many aspects of John's account. His session revealed additional sensory details. The sound of the object, described as soft, wet, and fish-like, almost hypnotic in quality, and the strange warmth that lingered on his body. Sketches made by both men matched closely, their testimonies independently reinforcing the credibility of the events. In the end, the Dapple Gray Lane encounter remains a vivid, puzzling case. The combination of humanoid and non-humanoid entities, telepathic communication, time lapses, and advanced holographic projections make it a singular example in UFO research. John Hodges and Pete Rodriguez, grounded and rational witnesses, experienced something that defies conventional explanation. Their story challenges us to consider the limits of perception, the potential of advanced extraterrestrial technology, and the profound mysteries that may still unfold above and around us. As we reflect on their experience, one thing is clear. Dapple Gray Lane is more than a quiet street in Southern California. It is a point where the ordinary world intersected with something extraordinary, a place where human understanding and alien intelligence briefly touched, leaving questions that remain unanswered to this day. On a warm summer night in June of 1953, the Houston Heights neighborhood was quiet in the way only late hours can make a city feel small. Porch lights glowed softly, cicadas filled the air. Nothing about the evening suggested it would become one of the strangest unsolved encounters in Texas history. Shortly after 2 a.m, 3 neighbors sat together on a front porch along East 3rd Street. One of them was a young housewife named Hilda Walker. Another was 14-year-old Judy Meyer. The third was a 33-year-old man named Howard Phillips. They weren't watching the sky. They weren't looking for anything unusual. They were simply talking, enjoying the night, when something dark moved across the lawn. At first, it appeared only as a shadow. Large, heavy, out of place. It stretched across the grass as if something enormous had just stepped into the yard. The shadow alone was enough to make them pause. Then, slowly, the source of it came into view. Standing near a pecan tree was a figure none of them could immediately explain. It was shaped like a man, upright and solid, but far taller than expected. The eyewitnesses would later estimate its height at around 6.5 feet. Attached to its back were wings, not feathers drifting in the breeze, but wide, bat-like wings folded close to the body. The figure did not rush or charge. It stood there motionless, as if aware it was being watched. What made the sight even stranger was the light. The witnesses described a faint yellowish glow surrounding the figure, an illumination that did not seem to come from the porch lights or the street. It outlined the wings, it traced the shape of the body. The glow made it impossible to dismiss the figure as a trick of darkness. They would later say the creature appeared to be wearing tight-fitting clothing, dark in color, almost like a uniform. No facial features were clearly visible. There were no glowing eyes or monstrous expressions, just a tall, silent shape framed by wings and light. For roughly 30 seconds, the three of them stared in disbelief. Then, without warning, the figure vanished. Some accounts describe a sudden flash of light. Others mention a sharp swooshing sound, as if air had been violently displaced. Whatever happened, it was over almost instantly. The glow was gone, the shadow disappeared. The pecan tree stood empty. The witnesses did not chase it. They didn't scream or run into the street. Instead, they sat frozen, trying to understand what they had just seen. By morning, the story hadn't faded. Hilda Walker and others contacted authorities, reporting what they believed to be a man with wings. Police took the report seriously enough to document it, even if they had no explanation to offer. The incident soon reached the pages of the Houston Chronicle, where it was labeled with a name that would follow it for decades: the Houston Batman. The article described the bizarre encounter in straightforward terms, reflecting the cautious tone of mid-century journalism. There was no sensational language, no dramatic speculation, just a strange report from three ordinary residents who had no reason to fabricate such a story. Despite the publicity, no additional witnesses came forward that night. There were no tracks found beneath the tree. No physical evidence remained by sunrise. The case quietly faded from headlines, but it never completely disappeared. Over time, the Houston Batman became a piece of local folklore, occasionally resurfacing in discussions of unexplained sightings. Decades later, researchers and journalists would rediscover the account while searching through old newspaper archives. What surprised many of them was how consistent the original descriptions were. 3 witnesses, the same location, the same details. Winged humanoid sightings are rare, but not unique. Similar reports have surfaced in different parts of the United States, often decades apart, often involving ordinary people who were not seeking attention. The most famous of these, the Mothman of Point Pleasant, would not be reported until 13 years later. Yet the Houston case predates it, standing as one of the earliest documented examples. Cryptozoologists have taken interest in the Houston Batman for that reason alone. Some suggest it represents a broader category of sightings that defy easy classification. Others believe it may have been an early example of mass misinterpretation, shaped by fear, darkness, and expectation. Skeptics point out the obvious problems. From a biological standpoint, a creature the size of a human could not fly using bat-like wings without an enormous wingspan and specialized musculature. No known species fits that description. The glow described by the witnesses raises further questions, as bioluminescence on that scale is unknown in mammals. Psychologists offer a different perspective. Late-night fatigue, low lighting, and the sudden appearance of an unexpected shape can cause the brain to fill in gaps rapidly. Once the idea of a figure takes hold, the mind may reinforce it with imagined details. The fact that the witnesses were together could have amplified that effect, and yet those explanations do not fully satisfy everyone. The witnesses never changed their story. There were no contradictions in their statements. They gained no fame or financial benefit from the encounter. The report did not spark a trend of copycat sightings in the area. It appeared, made itself known, and vanished from both the yard and the public eye. Another possibility sometimes raised is that the figure was human. Experimental gliding equipment existed in the early 1950s, although it was rare and dangerous. There's no evidence of such tests occurring in Houston Heights, and no reason for someone to perform them over a residential neighborhood in the middle of the night. No devices were recovered, no pilot ever came forward. Others speculate about hoaxes, but again, no props were found, no wires, no staged follow-up sightings. The logistics of creating a glowing, winged figure that could vanish silently remain unclear. More speculative interpretations drift further from conventional explanations. Some see the Houston Batman as a precursor to modern UFO encounters, noting the light, the sudden disappearance, and the sense that the figure did not move like a living animal. In this view, the wings may not have been biological at all, but part of some unknown technology or perception. Of course, that interpretation raises far more questions than it answers. Today, the street where the sighting occurred looks unremarkable. Houses have changed hands, trees have grown and been cut down. Most residents are unaware that anything unusual ever happened there. And yet, the story remains, preserved in newsprint and memory. What makes the Houston Batman unsettling is not what it was, but how briefly it appeared. There was no build-up, no aftermath, just a moment when reality seemed to bend and then snap back into place. So what should we make of it? On one side, there are the facts. 3 named witnesses, a specific date and location, contemporary newspaper coverage, a police report, details recorded before decades of pop culture could influence the narrative. On the other side, there's the absence of evidence. No photographs, no physical traces, no repeat sightings. Explanations rooted in psychology, biology, and misperception remain plausible. The Houston Batman sits at that uncomfortable intersection between documentation and disbelief. Too strange to dismiss outright, too elusive to explain with certainty. Whether it was a misidentified human, a trick of the mind, or something genuinely unknown depends on how much weight you give to eyewitness testimony when it stands alone. More than 70 years later, the pecan tree is gone, the eyewitnesses are long silent, and the glow has faded into history. But for 30 seconds on a quiet Houston night, something impossible may have stood in the yard, and that question remains, what did they really see? On a quiet afternoon in Southern California, a retired podiatric surgeon named Dr. Roger Lear prepared for what would become one of the most discussed medical procedures in modern UFO history. Lear was not a trauma surgeon or a research scientist. He was a foot doctor by training. Yet, over the years, he had developed a reputation that placed him far outside the boundaries of conventional medicine. Dr. Lear believed that some people were carrying physical evidence of encounters the wider world refused to acknowledge. Not memories, not dreams, but real objects embedded inside the human body. Objects that could be measured, photographed, and removed. By the early 2000s, Lear had already performed a number of unusual procedures. He claimed to have removed small foreign objects from patients who reported alien abduction experiences. He referred to these objects as implants. They were often discovered accidentally during X-rays or scans, sometimes after a patient complained of localized pain, numbness, or strange sensations. Supporters believe these removals represented a rare opportunity to examine physical evidence of non-human contact. Critics argued the objects were nothing more than ordinary debris interpreted through belief rather than science. The divide between these two perspectives would define Lear's career. Then came the case that would later be known simply as Patient 17. The man behind that designation chose to remain anonymous. He did not seek fame, and he avoided public appearances whenever possible. He came to Dr. Lear after medical imaging revealed a small object embedded deep within his leg, positioned unusually close to the bone. There was no obvious explanation for how it had arrived there. Patient 17 reported no major accidents, no childhood injuries that stood out, no industrial work that might explain a metallic fragment entering his body. Yet the object was clearly visible on imaging, sharply defined and dense. More troubling were the experiences he described when asked about his past. Periods of missing time that could not be explained, waking up with unexplained marks on his skin, a persistent feeling that parts of his life did not fully connect. He did not claim certainty, only that something about his experiences had never felt normal. When Dr. Lear examined the scans, several details stood out. According to his notes, the object appeared to be surrounded by nerve tissue, yet showed no signs of inflammation or rejection. There was no scar tissue typically associated with foreign bodies. The surrounding tissue looked calm, almost as if the object had always been there. For Lear, this was significant. In his experience, the human body does not quietly tolerate foreign materials. Even small fragments often cause irritation, pain, or immune response. This object appeared different. Before agreeing to surgery, Lear insisted on extensive documentation. Measurements were taken, X-rays and images were archived. The patient's medical history was reviewed in detail. Lear believed that if the object was removed without proper records, any opportunity to understand it would be lost. The procedure itself was performed under local anesthesia. Patient 17 remained conscious as Lear carefully worked through the layers of tissue. The atmosphere in the room was quiet and focused. This was not treated as a spectacle. To Lear, it was a medical procedure first, an investigation second. When the object was finally extracted, it was small enough to rest on the tip of a finger, smooth, metallic, and irregular in shape. To an untrained eye, it looked unremarkable, something that could easily be dismissed as a fragment of metal or shrapnel. But Lear was not convinced by appearances alone. According to his reports, the object exhibited several unusual properties. He claimed it was extremely hard, resisting attempts to cut or fracture it with standard surgical tools. He also stated that the object appeared to emit a weak electromagnetic signal, detected using handheld instruments. Further analysis conducted by associates and independent laboratories reportedly revealed a complex composition. Multiple elements were identified, some in combination Lear described as highly unusual. These findings became some of the most controversial aspects of the case. Critics were quick to respond. Medical professionals pointed out that foreign objects can enter the body without clear memory, particularly during childhood. Industrial environments, accidents, and even minor injuries can result in fragments becoming embedded and later forgotten. Skeptics also emphasized that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. One of the most significant criticisms was the lack of peer-reviewed publication. Without independent verification through established scientific channels, the findings remained claims rather than conclusions. To the scientific community, the case was unproven. Patient 17 himself remained cautious throughout. He never stated that the implant was proof of alien contact. He did not claim to know who placed it there or why. For him, the object represented a question rather than an answer, something that existed regardless of interpretation. Dr. Lear, however, refused to abandon the investigation. He argued that ridicule and dismissal had historically delayed scientific progress. He pointed to past discoveries that were once considered impossible or absurd. In his view, ignoring anomalous evidence simply because it challenged existing beliefs was unscientific. Until his death in 2014, Lear continued to speak publicly about implant removals. He maintained that the phenomenon deserves serious study, not mockery. While he acknowledged that definitive proof had not yet been established, he believed the objects warranted continued investigation. Years later, the case gained renewed attention through a documentary that followed Lear's final surgery and the mystery surrounding patient 17. The film did not present conclusions. Instead, it documented the procedure, the object, and the questions that followed. Viewers were left to decide for themselves. Was the implant evidence of advanced non-human technology? Or was it a misunderstood medical anomaly given meaning through belief in coincidence? That question remains unanswered. Today, the story of patient 17 exists in an uneasy space between medicine and mystery. Believers point to it as one of the most compelling physical cases connected to alien abduction claims. Skeptics view it as an example of how uncertainty can invite extraordinary interpretations. What cannot be disputed is that a real object was removed from a real person under documented medical conditions, and its origin has never been conclusively explained. Whether the implant was placed there by accident, by human hands, or by something far more unusual, the case continues to challenge assumptions about what we understand and what we dismiss. And as long as those questions remain unresolved, the story of patient 17 will continue to resurface, quietly resisting simple answers. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Leave a comment with what you think really happened. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep looking up.